In this, the second UCU film for Holocaust Memorial Day, what we wanted to do this time was focus not just on what is often talked about, which is the genocide that happened to men, women and children throughout Europe, Jews and many others who were persecuted by the Nazis, but talk very particularly this time about the journeys that people had, not just journeys to death camps, but in this case, the journeys of many of the thousands of children who had to leave occupied Europe or Europe as it was becoming a place where they were persecuted and found refuge in this country. But the journey of one child back in the 1930s and the 1940s to escape prosecution, the journey that they had away from their parents is exactly the same as many refugees feel today. So we hope you will watch this film, and we're very proud as UCU that we have brought it to you.
Hitler gains legal authority for dictatorship in March 1933. He calls for the boycott of Jewish businesses. Jews are prohibited from working in government offices and civil service positions, and a nationwide anti-Semitic campaign begins. The Nuremberg Laws, introduced in September 1935, are a major step by the Nazis to clarify racial policy and remove all Jewish influences from Aryan society. German Jews are stripped of their citizenship, and marriage between Germans and Jews is forbidden. On the nights of November 9th and 10th, 1938, the Nazis carried out a systematic program of vandalism against the Jews. Taken from their homes, Jews were forced to stand and watch their properties being burnt to the ground. The night became known as Kristallnacht, so called because of the smashed glass which covered the streets from the shops which were looted. It is often referred to as the beginning of the Holocaust.
I was born in Czechoslovakia. Actually, my mother was Czech, lived near Opava. She went to Dresden to study photography. There she met my father and they married, and my eldest brother was born in Dresden. I was due to be born in 1931, and Dresden was already a dangerous place for Jews. So she went back to her parents at Wittkopf near Opava. I was born there, then we rejoined my father. We had a good life in Dresden. Everything was really very happy and very good. Behind the flats there was a huge children's playground where my brother and I played with all the other kids in the apartments after school and in the holidays. And that was fine till 1935. When suddenly all the other kids turned on my brother and me and started name-calling and kicking and hitting and spitting, calling us dirty Jews. Things got so bad, my brother actually ran back into our flat and brought out my father's Iron Cross, which he won in First World War, fighting the British. But then things got very tense. We were a Jewish family, not a particularly religious Jewish family. And most of our family friends were not Jewish, actually. And my father had a particular friend, he and his wife. They had two boys the same age as me. We used to meet at their lovely big house quite often to play. And then quite suddenly one day, those two boys turned on my brother and me also. And my father's best friend joined the SS. So things got even more tense.
I was born in Berlin in 1935. I was only 4 when I came to England, so I can't remember a lot. But I have snatches of memory in Germany with my brother and my parents. We lived in a flat in Berlin. I remember visiting my grandmother, my dad's mum, the one that everybody says I look like. But I spent a lot of time with my other grandmother. My mother's family were Christian, whereas my dad's family were Jewish. I spent a lot of time with my mum's mum and her sister, my Aunt Ella, because it was relatively safe to be in a Christian family, But even then, the Gestapo came knocking on the door looking for my Jewish dad.
One day, my father and I, we were having a tickling match, actually, on the living room floor. He was tickling me, I was squirming and laughing, and I hit my head on a central heating radiator and started crying, cut my head open. And he took me to our family doctor. I remember him taking one look at this cut, and he said, "Oh, that needs a stitch." And then he added, "But I don't stitch Jews."
I was born in Prague. My family lived in Prague. We were fairly comfortably off, I think, insofar as one can judge that as a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. And then came the day when the Nazis, when the Germans occupied Prague early in 1939. My father disappeared immediately. My father was Jewish and my mother wasn't. That's the complication. My father disappeared immediately and hot-footed to England before they closed the frontiers. He'd said to his cousins, if the Nazis come off, and they said no, we'll take our chance. And in 1942, the Gestapo came for them, and that was the end of them. So he wasn't political, and he died when I was quite young. So I never had a chance to talk to him about what made him go, given that a lot of the Jews of Central Europe waited for things to happen with a sort of a sense of fatalism, and it's hard to understand why they made it so easy for the Nazis. Fear. We had to tear the picture of President Beneš, I was my first year at school, tear the picture of President Beneš out of our school books and stick in a picture of Hitler. And there were German soldiers everywhere. And clearly my mother was tense because of my father gone, and there was an air of uncertainty. I did not understand what was happening. I was aware there were big changes, that the German army was everywhere. And then my mother said she was going to get me to join my father. Bear in mind, of all the Kindertransport children, the majority never saw their parents again, so I was, in that sense, I was very lucky.
One day our parents put my brother and me in the back of the car in the middle of the night. We slammed the door on our apartment, left everything behind, didn't want to create suspicion at the border. We drove through the night. Because we weren't carrying much, we got across the border into Czechoslovakia, and we were safe there, back in my grandparents' lovely house. And I remember the German army, the cavalry, the infantry, the tanks, everything just marching through our village, our car being confiscated. And one day I remember, it's funny what's important to remember, my father and I, well, he was cutting down a diseased fruit tree in our garden, and I was sort of helping him, age 6. We were aware of heavy footsteps, and we looked up and there was an SS officer marching up our garden path. Why are you cutting the tree down? Well, it's diseased. What do you mean it's diseased? He had no knowledge of fruit trees. All he wanted to do was to play a game, and his idea of a game was to bully a Jew.
On the 15th of November 1938, a delegation of British Jewish leaders and non-Jewish agencies such as the Quakers appealed to the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, to permit the temporary admission of children and teenagers up to the age of 17. Otto Schiff, founder of the Jewish Refugee Committee and leader of the delegation, agreed to find homes for all of the children and promised to fund the operation, ensuring that none of the refugees would become a financial burden on the public. In an appeal to Parliament, Foreign Minister Sir Samuel Hoare said, "Here is a chance of taking the young generation of a great people. Here is a chance of mitigating to some extent the terrible suffering of their parents and their friends." On the 25th of November 1938, a BBC radio broadcast was transmitted appealing for foster homes to house refugee children. "I ask you to come to the aid of victims not of any catastrophe in the natural world, not of earthquake, nor of flood, nor of famine, but of the explosion of man's inhumanity to man." This became known as the Kindertransport program. The initial rule was 1 child per family, which proved difficult for many parents who had to make the agonizing decision of which child should go. Journeys were made by train from Berlin, Vienna, Prague, and other major cities in Central Europe to ports in Belgium and the Netherlands. Children were only allowed to take a small sealed suitcase with no valuables. Most children wore a manila tag bearing a number on the front and their name on the back. Other children were issued with a numbered photo identity card. Parents, numb, knowing that they would not be seeing their children again, made promises. We will soon follow.
And then I remember the journey to England. Our mother, who was a proper Aryan German, could get a visa and come with us on the train. And we set off at Zoo Station in Berlin. And I recognized Zoo Station because my Aunt Ella used to take me to the zoo. And I decided I wanted to go to the zoo, not to England. I hadn't a clue what England was. And I threw a tantrum. And I always thought as a child that that's why I was sent away, because I was such a naughty girl. That tantrum on Zoo Station. That's how little children think.
So she put me on a train. I still can see in my mind's eye Prague Station. It's nearly midnight, I think. A German soldier with a swastika standing there, and my mother in front of me, outside the carriage, with a friend of hers, and a sort of sense of tension. But I didn't know what was happening. I was about the youngest on this train.
And one day, my father called my brother and me and said, "You're going on a long journey. You're going to a country called England. We can't come with you, but maybe when the trouble's over, we can come and join you in England, or you can come back here. We'll have to wait and see." My father taught me to say, in a good Oxbridge accent, "I can't speak English." So if anybody spoke to me, I would say I can't speak English. But then they took us down to the railway station, put us on a train, and simply said goodbye. And as the train was about to leave, my mother took a wristwatch off and said, gave it to me and said, "Remember us by this watch."
One of Nicholas Winton's trains, and the train went off, and then we got to the Czech frontier, and there was something wrong with the paper, so they had to send back for the documents. Anyway, it was a long, long journey, and when we got into Holland, all the older ones cheered because they knew they were out of Nazi Germany. I didn't understand the significance. I was looking for windmills and wooden shoes, neither of which I saw.
All I can remember of the journey quite vividly was an endless train journey. I only remember my mother and my brother. I think that's what small children do. They block out the rest. The rest is not important. And I took it rather as a family outing. I remember being woken up when we got to the coast and my brother dragging me along because I was half asleep and getting onto this huge boat, and I was terrified that so many people and so many cases the boat was sure to sink. And my brother calmed me down. He said, "Don't be so silly, boats don't sink."
We then got to the Hook of Holland on the boat, over to Harwich, medical examination, and then by train to Liverpool Street, where we had to be checked off. We had dog tags on. Now, my father came to meet me. As I say, the majority of the children did not have anybody to meet them of their family, so I was quite lucky.
Some parents could not bear to be apart from their children, and in the last few moments before trains departed, would pull them off. The first Kindertransport left Berlin on December 1st, 1938, bound for the Netherlands. 200 children arrived in Harwich the following day from a Jewish orphanage in Berlin that had been destroyed in the Kristallnacht pogrom. The last transport from Germany left on September 1st, 1939, just as World War II began. The majority of children were taken to London Liverpool Street Station, where they were met by their foster families. Those children without sponsors were housed in temporary accommodation.
At Liverpool Street Station, we were met by a very lovely lady who, at the station there were just groups of English people mixing in amongst the several hundred children that got off the train. We had a name and number and our necks, and they were looking for a name and a number. And when they found us, they simply signed us out and took us to their home while we were in London. And this was my first taste of England.
One of the things that impressed me, I mean, I was quite bewildered. I'd had a backpack with food my mother had packed, and I'd eaten none of it in 2 days travelling. Obviously, I must have been a bit traumatised because I didn't eat it. Anyway, that's only what I discovered when my father said to me, "You've eaten none of the food."
No, I remember in London being very frightened of the double-decker buses and saying to my brother, "Why do the English paint their buses red, the colour of blood?" And my brother saying to me, he must have said it in German, of course, "Don't be so silly, you've got to get used to it. We're in England now, and everybody in England is mad." And because he said it so calmly, it satisfied me.
First thing that I saw which frightened me was a double-decker bus, which was bound to turn over. I'd never seen anything as high as a double-decker bus before. Then we got a train to Sheffield. Aunt Vera, as I learned to call her, took us to her home with Uncle Les. And the first thing I saw when we got into the house was an open fire in a fireplace, coal fire in a fireplace. I remember I thought the house was on fire because I'd never seen a combustion stove before. Then going to bed, these sheets and blankets. I didn't know which layer to get into. Inconsequential, but they are my first memories of this country.
And the other thing that impressed me was, having seen the might of the German army going through Prague, I saw there were women, was it ATS or Women's Royal Army? Anyway, the women marching, and I was really impressed. The women were in the army in Britain. You know, I'd sort of used to all the German soldiers, and there it was. This is what this is how a 6-year-old sees it.
As long as my brother didn't get upset, everything must be all right. That's very, very important. It must have been a terrible strain on Martin, but the last words of our parents to him were, "Look after your little sister." So he had a job to do, which kept him in touch with his parents in his mind. And that was very important.
In 1946, my brother and I received a big International Red Cross parcel. We opened it, and there were all our family photograph albums. Somebody had been into our house, found the albums, decided they were important to somebody, must have given them to the International Red Cross and said, "Find the owner." And the owner found us. And we have these 3 wonderful photograph albums. And with the albums, there was a letter. I'd like to read just an English translation, or rough translation. My mother wrote, "Dear boys, when you receive this letter, the war will be over. We want people to send it earlier. We want to say farewell to you, who were our dearest possession in the world. And only for a short time were we able to keep you. Fate has not left us for months now. In January 1942, the violets were taken. And we still didn't know where to, and we don't know whether they're still alive. In June, Grandmother Betty. In September, Aunt Marion, Uncle Willie and Polly. In October, your Steiner grandparents. In November, your 90-year-old great-grandmother. In December, it will be our turn. And the time has therefore come for us to turn to you again and to ask you to become good men and think of the years we were happy together. We are going into the unknown. Not a word is to be heard from those already taken. Thank those who've kept you from a similar fate. You took, of course, a piece of your poor parents' hearts with you when we decided to give you away. Give our thanks and gratitude to all who are good to you. And then Father added, your dear mother has told you about the hard fate of all our loved ones. We too will not be spared, and we will go bravely into the unknown with the hope that we shall yet see you again when God wills. Don't forget us and be good. I too thank all the good people who have accepted you so nobly. That letter was written just a fortnight before they were taken to Auschwitz, or about that. It's interesting that they say in December it will be our turn. They must have, they were living in a Czech village, and we get this picture of Jews just being dragged off willy-nilly. They must have been given some notice. In a couple of weeks, we're coming to get you. Don't try and hide. It's too late. There is something so cold and organized a way about the way the Nazis did this.
At the time, I think I had the feeling that if evil men in politics can do these things, maybe other people in politics can reverse the process. And I think I was well treated by this country. And one of my aims, both in politics and in working for the Refugee Council, was to try and ensure two things. One is that these terrible things would never happen again. And the other thing is, I wanted to do all I can to ensure that people who do flee for safety have at least some chance of finding the sort of welcome that I received.
The Kindertransport program brought 10,000 children, some 7,500 of them Jewish, from Nazi-occupied Europe to Great Britain. If it were not for the many individuals and organizations involved, it would not have succeeded. They were not asked, nor were they called, but often at great personal risk to themselves, they gave hope to the children and the families they left behind. It is important to remember that more than 1.2 million Jewish children and tens of thousands of Roma and disabled children were murdered. Those who helped included Irina Sendler, saved the lives of 2,500 children in the Warsaw Ghetto. Every child saved with my help is the justification of my existence, and not a title to glory. Dr. Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld organised the evacuation of close to 1,000 children, finding Orthodox homes for them in the UK. Wilfred B. Israel is credited with saving the lives of his 700 Jewish employees, as well as the lives of many children who travelled on the Kindertransport. Sir Nicholas Winton is well known for organising the passage of 699 mainly Czech children from Nazi-occupied Europe during the 9 months before war broke out in 1939. Don't be content in your life just to do no wrong. Be prepared every day to try and do some good. Holocaust Memorial Day, 27th of January